Hi, everyone. I'm Jan Ryan, and I am Director of the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship here at the College of Fine Arts. We want to welcome you tonight to our series, The Conversations with Creative Founders, where we just use this time to engage and talk with successful artists and successful creatives who have somehow been able to tackle those big issues around the business side of art and really learn from them. We're especially excited tonight to have acclaimed artist Borbay with us talking about this topic. And moderating this is a student moderator, the talented Tabitha Burke, who will bring to the table student questions that she would like to ask. And I hope that you also will be thinking about questions as we move to Q&A. And so we have a robust back and forth at the end. So Borbay, Tabitha, I give it to you.
Thank you, Jan. And thank you, Borbay, for joining us today. I know Borbay through living in the mountains and the Teton Mountains, and Borbay and I were a short 40-minute drive from each other. We got to meet. I got to see his studio, have dinner a few times, and just get to know more about him as an artist. And I've really been fascinated by your story and your work, and I think it's phenomenal. I would love if you could just start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you started as an artist.
Well, I would love to. Thank you, Tabby, for having me, and thank you, University of Texas, for having me. And the center that you guys have and the service you're providing is incredible, and probably would be the number one piece of feedback I would have given to my college when I graduated, because it's very necessary. So it's awesome to be here. So I was born on Long Island, and I went to college at Boston University. I had an incredible art teacher in high school who put me on a collegiate art track when I was very young. And that was just very lucky that I got into her class. It was Mrs. Lipsey's class. And we had a figure drawing professor and everything. So went to college, ran Division I, cross country and track, got a Bachelor in Fine Arts and Graphic Design with concentrations in advertising and art history. And then I went on a very strange trajectory of jobs. I was an assistant designer at the Beacon Hill Times, a weekly newspaper in Boston. Then I was going to move to Los Angeles to become an actor, and I randomly got on a reality TV show in East Boston. So I did that for 6 months, saved up money, moved to New York City, and was going to be an actor, didn't have money for acting class, so jumped in and started doing stand-up comedy. So I did that for a year. And then randomly got an interview with the Trump Organization and ended up working at Trump Tower for just under 2 years as a legal development associate, which was a title that I made up, and got to work on some pretty cool things. And then I decided to move on from there, and I went into recruiting. So I was a permanent placement specialist. So I was placing people full-time in ad agencies, creative studios, consumer brands, Coach, Calvin Klein, places like that, big ad agencies. And then I kind of effectually placed myself as a PR coordinator / recruiter at an ad agency called Fantasy Interactive, and then moved up to business director and split my time between Tribeca downtown Manhattan and Stockholm, Sweden, and landed some cool clients, Porsche, Electronic Arts, Nintendo. And then I was in Maui on vacation with my then girlfriend, now wife, Erin, and was painting on the beach and realized I wasn't living my truth. So came home, gave 6 weeks notice, and became a full-time artist on July 2nd of 2009. And it's all I've been doing since.
Wow. So it sounds like you've really done it all. I would love to go back to you at Boston University and talk about, I'm a student right now. I really would love to hear more about your time as a student, your time at university, and what were some of the tools you did to kind of propel your art career at the time of being a student and handling, you said you were on the track team and you were doing all these other things. So I would love to hear more about that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it was the first 2 years there, it was really cool. We did, it was all studio art. So it was called Foundation. So it was drawing, painting, printmaking, photography, kind of sculpture, everything you can imagine. So it was very cool. But of course, at the time, I was also running 100 miles a week. So I was constantly exhausted. So all my art friends, and obviously I had two very distinctly different groups of people I hung out with, like the track team and then my art friends. And so they were really cool, and it was Boston, so it was always cold. So they'd stack up their jackets and stuff by the radiator, and I'd take a nap for the first hour of studio, and then my teacher would come over and kick me and be like, "All right, Borbay, you got to do some drawing," and get up and do my thing. And but it was awesome. Then I went into graphic design from there, because when I matriculated in 1998, they were giving signing bonuses to graphic designers. And when I came out post.com burst bubble, you needed a PhD to get a job at Blockbuster Video. Blockbuster, rest in peace. So it was very interesting. It was a big time balancing act, but any kind of athlete could tell you, regardless of the sport, the discipline required for training, and making sure you get enough sleep and the right dietary patterns and everything. That was integral, and being able to just get through college. I mean, the art program itself was demanding enough, but I did that. I was on the Student Athletic Advisory Council, trying to make things better for the track and cross country teams, and got involved with a whole bunch of different stuff through the school. So I mean, it was a wonderful time, and it was a great university.
Do you think if you could go back and tell yourself something as a student, what do you think that would be?
Well, yeah, I probably squeaked through with a 2.9, and so maybe I could have put a little bit more effort into it. It's again, it was just a constant fatigue. I mean, I'd be in art history after a 5-mile morning run, and then 3 studio sessions, then I'd run 9 miles and go lift weights. So it was hard. I did the best I could. But one of the things that was really important for me was we had this school called School Management, right? SMG. Everything was acronyms there. And they had this program called CORE. And so they would take a group of students and they would build an entire business from start to finish, starting in the fall semester and ending in the spring. And so we had the College of Fine Arts, then we had the College of Communications, which is second or third in the country with Syracuse and someone else. It was a really good school. So I saw an opportunity there. So I basically told the people at CORE, because they would come up with a company, a brand, a product, a marketing plan, a business plan, all the way through execution. So I started doing the branding for them for like $500, which, was good for drinking money and what have you in college. And, the synergy between the schools was really interesting. It wasn't official, and I wrote a proposal to make it official, but with communications and collaborating with the artistic creators and collaborating with the entrepreneurs and business people who are building the business plan and the entire ethos of a brand, I think that there's a lot of synergy to be had with your fellow students, because when you get in the real world, that's exactly what you're going to experience.
When did you know that you were ready to kind of take that jump and become, after school? I remember when we were talking and you were telling me some ideas about, how students can kind of propel their entrepreneurial career farther. And what were some of those things that you did while being in school as an artist to, put yourself out there, get yourself known, and get the world knowing who you were and what your art was?
Great question. Back when we were in Web 1.0 when I was in college, so I had a couple of credits that I needed to graduate. So I made a deal with my graphic design professor that, I'd pace him through a half marathon at Boston pace, so he would just be ready for it. So we ran the New Bedford half together, and then I told him I would build a website. And so, that was kind of my first foray into it, and at the time, we're like, this is pre-Facebook, this is the Friendster era, so it was kind of like, I can't even remember, there was some sort of blogging platform. I can't remember what it was. And it was so old school. So it was just a basic HTML website that we put out there. It wasn't like you could go on Instagram and do all these things. And my first projects were literally kind of cruising Craigslist for projects. And
there were some strong mistakes that you made that you could kind of look back on now and say, man, I regret doing that?
Yeah, the biggest mistake I made was I designed a guy's logo. So I saw it on Craigslist, and I was like, same thing that everyone's going to tell you, exposure, it'll be great for your portfolio. And so I did this logo. I sent him a proof of it. He never paid me. And this is how insulting this is. Not only did he not pay me, the job was only for $50. And so I did his logo, and I go and it's on his website. It's all over the place. And he didn't even pay me $50. So, fortunately, even at a young age, I knew a little bit about the law. There was, it's the Freelancers Union. They published this amazing book, and it gives you templates for contracts and what to expect for art business, art law. So I wrote a pretty stinging cease and desist letter and, got that taken down. But at the same time, it was, lesson number one, contracts for everything, even with friends.
Yeah. So that's another one of my questions is how do you separate pricing your friends and family, from pricing strangers? That's definitely something I struggle with a lot is, when a friend comes up to you and they're like, hey, Borbay, hey, Tabby, I just need this quick logo and I'm willing to pay. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't know what you mean by willing to pay, but how do you, differentiate that and kind of put your career as an artist before those friendships and those relationships?
It's a great question. I think it's probably one of the most frequent questions as well. And, basically, look, when you're starting out, okay, and if you're in any kind of business, you could go and talk to anybody. You could talk to Jeff Bezos and, when he was working out of a one-room hovel starting Amazon, if he was going to get a contract with someone, he probably paid them for initial contracts just to get in to start his company. So, in the beginning, it's whatever you can do. And the first people who are going to patronize you are going to be friends and family. So, in the beginning of your career, you're kind of flexible. And like, let's say, you want to charge, I don't know, $500 for something. And, a friend and family come along and, they can only pay $250. Okay, fine. Like, let's do that. Let's make it happen. It's a friends and family discount. Let's kind of keep that on the down low, that sort of thing. And you kind of build out consistency from there. Because in the beginning, you have to do what you got to do. There's the only rule is don't drown. Once you get past the not drowning phase, that's when you start to build out a more significant business structure where your pricing becomes more concrete, more routine. And of course, even with your early friends, if it's even on just a napkin, you need to put something in writing because you'll be shocked. And the one thing you don't want to do on your way of building something is destroy a friendship through poor business. Because, when you're starting out, like I look back at some of the stuff I did when I was young, I was so proud of, and then you look back on it, it's pretty cringe, you have to start somewhere and develop. So it's like, but you have to go through those phases, and then the people who are with you all along, they'll be there with you as you go. And then when you become, when you're in a more mature phase of your career, obviously if someone who's bought 5, 6, 7 of your paintings, they really like a painting that's almost done, you can give them a preferred price, within the context of your market. And, and that's deserved because they've supported you throughout the years. They're really into what you do, and that they're going to be there, and they're evangelists. So,
yeah. So how do you identify those who value your work? Like, and specifically yourself, who's your customer and what's their profile, and how do you know, to continue to cater to them while also expanding who you want your art to reach?
I think just to take a quick step back, really, like, what you have to do is, it doesn't matter whatever you do. If you're going to be a clothing designer, a painter, a filmmaker, a textile designer, it doesn't matter. You have to treat yourself like a brand. And I know that that's kind of the like anti-ethos of creativity, but I'm talking like, you got to come up with an identity. You got to come up with a logo. You got to come up with a cohesive brand. You got to come up with, what does your brand mean? You got to come up with the business infrastructure, the marketing infrastructure. If you're a brand, your brand will do this, it won't do that. That's harkening back to Paul Rand and his revolutionizing branding, and just, you go through, and this is what the brand does. This is what the brand doesn't. And you got to build this entire infrastructure out. And once you have that infrastructure, then you can work within that infrastructure and create what you want. So for me, when you find someone who is not only passionate about your work, but they become evangelists, that's huge. And what you want is people to understand you and understand your work. So I've always strived to be aspirational. So when I looked at the brands that I admired most, it's like, wow, I love that car. I aspire to have that car. That car is so beautiful. Or I aspire to live in this kind of community or home. So for me, I want someone who wants to buy my painting because it means that they have achieved something. And it's, people who have saved up 5, 6 years, and they get to buy a piece, and that this piece on their wall is a symbol of, I've arrived, I've made it. And for anything that you do, the deeper the connection between what you create and the people who acquire what you create, the stronger your brand and the stronger your market in the long run. If you have someone who walks into your art studio and says, hey, I'll pay $100,000 and I'm going to buy all your paintings, that's all well and good. And that's cool. And you're going to feel pretty baller. But if they just take those paintings and they put them in storage, wait for your market to go up, and then they just flip them, you're not developing a strong brand. If you have paintings on the wall that people are like, this is going to be handed down for 3 generations and you're going to pry it out of my family's hands, then you're onto something.
So as a beginner artist, like, and kind of going through those motions and figuring that out, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes that, beginner artists incur?
Well, there's so many mistakes, and that's why we've discussed this as well. I'm a major believer in mentorship. If you find someone and you connect with them and they're willing to share their time and experience with you, then you have to take it, and you should be so grateful for your mentors. I have a gentleman in Montreal. His name is Robert, and he literally has changed my life. And I call him for advice, and he's acquired a bunch of paintings. He's made major, significant introductions. And these people are, they're gold. They're valuable. When you go out there and you're doing stuff, you're going to have to learn by trial and error. You're going to make mistakes, and it's going to happen. And you just have to learn from them. If you make a mistake and you learn from it, that's 10 times more valuable than occasionally making the same mistake over, or never making the mistake, or someone telling you. You have to just go through it. But when I look at artists and creative people who are starting out, I think that it's important for you to be thematic. So I would say that if you're going to create a painting of something, don't create 1, create 7. And then you have a finite series that was created in a certain period of time, in the same style, in the same general size vicinity. So someone can look back and say, oh, okay, I got that from Tabby when she was in her whatever phase. And, I know what that means. And that's, and it's finite. And so people know, and they can wrap their head around it. Like, I've done kick-ass actors in kick-ass roles. I've done an anti-hero series portraits. I've done Kings of Hip Hop portrait series. And, when you look back at them, there's 7 of each of them. So someone owns it and they're like, oh, that's cool, I own one. It's like, oh, I have 2 of those. And, it's easy to understand. There's that. And then, of course, the business aspect, which is, contracts, pricing development, pricing growth. And, that's where you're constantly growing and experiencing growing pains. But you have to do it.
Do you think that you have an eye, like, on the art world? Like, are you consistently, and more specifically, I think the art market, and watching it grow and putting a price tag on time and materials and experience, how do you come up with a cost for that stuff? And how does it develop as the art market changes?
Great question. For me, I like to read a lot. So I read a lot of artist biographies. I read a lot of business books. And again, absence of actual physical human mentors. If the information is out there and you can learn from it, you should. And I implore anyone to do that. For me, it's like, you look back at like the Warhol diaries, and he's like, this is how your price gets established. You're at a party. Someone says, oh, that's an artist over there. I like him. I bought his painting. I paid this for it. And the other woman's like, oh, that's cool. Then you've established your market. For me, the first painting I sold just happened to be a Guggenheim, and it was 30 by 30 inches. And I sold it for $2,400. And I called my friend Blaze, who was working in an art gallery. I said, Blaze, here's the picture of the painting. It's 30 by 30. I have collectors coming over from Milan. What should I do? And he said, okay, he's like, 2,400. If they're really good negotiators, don't go below 1,500. So I was fortunate enough to have that framework to work within. I sold that painting for 2,400. So that kind of established, my base market. And you could see this too in the NFT space when you see the base prices and then the way that everything is developing there. So my goal is every January 1st, my prices across the board of existing work and commissions, bless you, it goes up between 5 and 15%. So if it was a leaner year and it was because you have these years, you have developing years, election years tend to be a little bit down because people are a little bit more conservative about their recreational spending, and I create luxury items. So, but 5 to 15%. So I sold a painting in the Guggenheim series, I think like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I sold it for $16,000. And I've already made a commitment to myself that the 20th in the series, I'm going to sell for $1 million. Do
you ever change your price once it's been marked?
No, never change it. And as the prices go up, the prices continue to go up.
Have you ever had someone come up to you and say, well, I love your piece, but that price just isn't working for me. Like, would you be able to do it, for this? And how do you go about that?
That's probably the toughest thing that you face as an artist is, someone with very real money. I was doing a painting series at the Four Seasons Jackson Hole a couple of summers ago. And I would go each week and I would do a session painting. And so I would do a 20 inch by 20 inch painting of a neon in one session. And so I was selling them for $6,000, you know, and so I had just sold one the week before for $6,000. And, you know, again, same series, same context. So a gentleman at the bar, he was watching me paint this thing and he said, "Hey, I'll give you $4,000 for it right now." And I said, "You know, I'm sorry, sir. I really appreciate the offer, but I just can't take it because I sold one for $6,000 last week and I can't damage the market and damage that collector relationship." This particular guy decided to tell me what I might do with myself and kind of stormed away. But, you know, what's more important to me is to protect that collector who spent $6,000 in good faith. When I tell them, listen, I'm not going to sell a piece in this series for less than this, you know, and that's the same thing for the Guggenheim. It's really cool to call up the first couple of collectors who bought them for between 2,400 and 4,000 and be like, "Yeah, I just sold one for 16." They're like, "Oh, that's pretty cool," you know, and I send updated appraisal letters, and so they know exactly where they are and what they should insure the work for. And that's also a good reach around for me because I'm self-represented. So insurance letters and insurance agencies validate my market. So
That's awesome. You mentioned your Guggenheim series, and I'd love to get more into that because I think that's a huge part of who you are as an artist. How did that series get started?
So 2009, it was my first professional painting. And at the time, I called myself a location artist. So I would set up all around New York City and set up my easel and paint because I love to talk, you know, I'm obviously not a shy person. And it was cool for people to come by and, "Hey, what are you doing?" And so I was doing a painting of the Guggenheim, 89th and 5th, same perspective as you see behind me. And at the time, my younger brother, who's 8 years younger than me, Tim, I told him to kind of walk by every 20 minutes and be like, "I must have this canvas," you know, and so it was a joke. But then eventually this family from Milan came by and they loved it. And a short story long, like 3 days later, they came to my studio, bought it and another painting. I also foolishly threw in shipping to Milan, which don't ever do that. It was very, very expensive. So I ended up flying there and hand delivering it, which was more fun, but very, very scary. But then the next year I wanted to paint it again, but I was like, you know, artists are very competitive and I ran with a cool art crew, you know, and it's like, you know, this kind of crew, not like hardcore. And they were like, "Oh, dude, that's whack. You're just doing it to sell another painting." I was like, "Yeah, that kind of does come across that way." So I decided, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do a painting of the Guggenheim every year for 20 years. And I did this for two reasons. Reason one was to see the evolution of my style, you know, what was happening in the year, why I painted it in that style, what was happening in the world. The other was just a commitment to myself to say that, you know, in 20 years, I'm still going to be painting. And, you know, just like you bring your suits to Goodwill when you quit a corporate job, you got to put paint all over yourself and make a long-term commitment because times do get rough.
Would you ever trade your pieces of art for other things? Like if another artist comes along and they say, "Well, I've got this painting, it's 30 by 30, and you've got that painting and I love it." Like, would you make a trade? Is that a separate contract? And would you do it with things that aren't necessarily art as well?
Yes. So I have definitely done trades. And so if you look back historically in the art world, a lot of the beautiful personal collections that artists have amassed were from trading with other artists. And so I've traded, I would say, probably 3 paintings for 3 paintings over the years. And they're with artists that, you know, I deeply admire and respect, and I love their work. And it's a great way to collect work because, you know, as you're growing, you don't want to insult an artist and be like, "Well, shoot, you know, I know that painting's 15 grand, but I can't pay that right now," you know? So it's a cool way that you get to trade and get yourself a collection. We won't go into how, you know, you should be paying use tax and taxable events. That's a whole other thing. I'll leave that to the accountants, you know? But I think it's a wonderful thing. You know, later down the road, sure. I mean, if I was selling, you know, or when I'm selling my paintings for $1 million, like, yeah, if someone's like, "I got this cute little casita down on the waterfront in, you know, Puerto Vallarta, and do you want to make a trade?" I'd be like, "Let's do this thing." You know, and of course, again, that's like, the higher the numbers, the more dangerous the tax implications. But yes, you know, and again, it's all about value. Like one time, Andy Warhol gifted Bob Dylan a painting, and then Andy found out later that Bob Dylan traded it for a couch. So you gotta avoid situations like that, and you know, because again, it's like that's a I mean, obviously, Warhol came out unscathed, as did Bob Dylan, but you don't want to have a scenario where, someone's trading your painting for a couch. I'm not going to let that happen.
It could be a heck of a couch though, right?
I heard it was a really well-built couch and very comfortable, but that couch is probably now in the landfill, and that Warhol's worth probably about $5 million. So,
Exactly.
Bob was telling him, he's like, "Hey man, I'm so sorry if you gave me another one. I'd never do that again." It's like, dude, come on, right? Like,
So kind of just to wrap up my end of questions, I am curious where you see yourself kind of going in the future. Now you have 3 kids, you're in Victor, and how do you, see yourself as an artist continuing to grow and get out there?
I mean, great question. I think that's the most exciting thing about life, is that you never really know. Because if you would have told me, 10 years ago that I'd be a married father of 3 living in Idaho, I'd probably be like, that's pretty crazy, but, here I am and I'm loving every minute of it. I think for me, it's just steering the course. I want to continue to develop my paintings, my market. As far as I know, and maybe someone on the professorial side can look this up for me, but I don't think that there's ever been an artist who has been completely self-represented through their career to ever sell a painting directly to a collector for $1 million. And that's my goal. And the sooner I can do that, the better. But continue to just push myself creatively and, become the best artist that I can be. I don't think I could live long enough to achieve or to capture all the things that I already have in my mind. And then, of course, there's the NFT space, which is something that I've been experimenting with and learning a lot about. And I'm collaborating with a group called Parity Now, which is a brand that champions female athletes. And so we're creating NFTs for female athletes, to help supplement their income, help get them exposure. So obviously, the NFT space, blockchain technology, the convergence of this and that, but, also remembering that I chose to do something antiquated. Robots are doing AI paintings now, and that's great, but there's always going to be a need for someone to have a hand-painted work of art. And I hope I never have assistants. I don't want to run a factory. I just want to create original work that is created by yours truly. And I don't do reproduction. So when you walk into someone's home, you're like, that's a Borbay. And they know it's like the real McCoy. And, in the long run, whether or not I'm going to fall into the zeitgeist of museums and textbooks, that's not for me to say. That's just going to happen or not happen. So continuing to push myself, embracing the process from start to finish, loving the start of the painting as much as the bullying through the middle part. That's the whole package.
Awesome. I think my last question from student to mentor would be how, as someone myself who craves change constantly, how do you find yourself all these years later not getting bored of kind of doing the same thing? And is there ever a time where you're like, I don't want to paint anymore, I want to do something totally different? Or, even a week's period of doing that? And how do you kind of keep yourself stimulated while continuing to do the same work?
The Guggenheim series has been the best test of that. It's like, there are some years where I'm like, oh boy, the Guggenheim again. And then the last couple of years with the world being what it is, I'm like, man, I can't wait to get to the Guggenheim. But I think as long as you're committed to structure, you're never going to falter. So when I started painting full time, I realized that a lot of my buddies, they'd be like, all right, let's get tuned up at 10 o'clock and, like drink a bunch of Four Loko and rip a couple joints and paint until 5 a.m. And that's all well and good. But when I did it full time, even before I had a family, I realized that I needed structure. So I do 9 to 5. Well, it's more like 8 to 5, but I try to stick to Monday through Friday, try to take the weekends off. So that's very important, because if you don't have structure, that's going to hurt you. Also, as with any career, you want to increase your earning potential. So that's why my rates go up every year. And then I try to challenge myself. So a lot of artists, they find something that works, that sells. And a lot of artists that are represented through galleries, they find this constantly where it's like, hey, you do this one thing really well, so I want you to just do 10 of those and 5 of these, and then we're going to open up a show in 3 different cities. That's all well and good, but then it becomes more of a chore as opposed to a creative enterprise. So I think following your own beacon, and if you're feeling flat about something you're doing, that's probably a result.
Thank you so much. I think I want to open this up to the chat. I know we don't have a lot of participants, but if anyone has questions, I'm happy to read them out loud, or if you want to unmute yourself and jump on with a couple questions. So we can wait around and do that. Jan, I don't know if you have.
Well, I'll start us off while people are thinking about it and putting it in chat. And again, feel free just to unmute, as Tabby said. But maybe especially for those that will be listening to this on our YouTube channel as we go forward, maybe you could go back. You mentioned NFTs, but just explain for us a little bit, Borbay, what NFTs are and maybe what your experience has been, going a little bit more depth, because this is an arena we get a lot of questions around right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So NFTs, which I think are poorly branded because it stands for non-fungible tokens, which is essentially a digital property that resides on the blockchain. There are multiple blockchains, but let's take, for example, there's a platform called OpenSea, and you can set up a digital entity called an NFT on an OpenSea blockchain, many of which are done on the Ethereum blockchain, which Ethereum is just a cryptocurrency. And you put a property up, and you could do it either by purchase now, you can purchase by addition, or you can do an auction. And when things are transferred, everything is transparent. So you have a digital record for a unique token for the acquiring party and for the creating party. And so you transfer the funds for the digital property. And then you could stipulate that on every resale, the original creator can get a percentage of those resales in perpetuity. Which is very unique. And in fact, in the 60s, Robert Rauschenberg, he was a major advocate for artists' rights. And so he had famously sold a couple of paintings to Bob and Ethel Scull, who were taxi magnates who just had phenomenal eyes for contemporary art. I mean, they bought Jasper Johns, Rauschenbergs, Basquiat's, Warhols, well before anyone knew what those guys were all about. So they were brilliant. So they were getting divorced. So they had bought two paintings from Rauschenberg for, I think, $2,000 and $900, auctioned them for about $80,000 each. And Rauschenberg famously chest bumped him in front of the courthouse and pushed him, and he was super ticked off, So Rauschenberg went to California, and, because California is where all intellectual property laws and precedents are set in the courts, and tried to effectually pitch an analog blockchain wherein you would have the same sort of transparency as the digital blockchain that we have today, where every time there would be a sale, the artist would get a percentage on the resale. But of course, at that time, people were just like, oh, no, we're not doing that. Because someone acquires it, they feel that they're entitled to the full resale value. So I think that eventually what you're going to see is that, this painting is a physical painting. But I might put that on the blockchain and sell the physical painting and the NFT, which is just the digital property of the painting, essentially a JPEG. And then if that transacts, every time the original painting sells, I will get a percentage. But I think that, like the computers becoming aware of Terminator, I think we're a little far away from that right now. But I think within 3 to 5 years, that's going to be standard operating procedures for galleries, for artists, for anyone selling anything creatively. So it's really good. And, obviously with art, and NFTs, and you look at the whole Beeple thing and auction houses, people are the big money laundering question, right? So, but who knows? But I do think that NFT technology is here to stay. And I think the convergence with the real art world is going to happen sooner rather than later.
I have a couple questions in the chat and a few direct messages that I'd love to read.
Please.
First one is, should the cost of materials and time factor into pricing a sale for a new artist like those of us in college?
It's a great question. So, short answer, yes. Long answer, no. So obviously, look, you don't want to do something at a loss. So if you're buying paints and canvases and, your material costs are $200 to create a piece, you shouldn't sell it for $150, right? I mean, that's just standard business operating. But, you also want to get your work into people's collections. So in the beginning, you have to start out. There are artists who do create at a price per square inch format, which I think when you're starting out is actually helpful. So, figure, what your time, what your material costs are. Time is the key. How much time are you going to spend on this? And remember, okay, when you're just starting out, yes, you could work at a coffee shop and get, I don't know, 12, $15 an hour, maybe 20 with tips or something, and figure, okay, so I could be doing that, but I'm doing this, which I love, and I spent $200 on materials, and I could be making $200 a week, if, based on your work hours. So you do want to factor that all together. If you look up online, there are definitely some places where you can find out, like if you just Google pricing art per square inch, you'll get some really good information on that. But essentially what you want to do is set your base price and you never go below it. That's it. Like once you get to that base price, that's the basement. There's no sub basement, and you only go up from there.
Got it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Another question I got was, what different media do you paint with? Your website has a wide variety of exciting styles, but is there also a variety of media that you paint with? And do you have a drawing practice as well?
So yes, great questions. I'm a creature of habit. So I've been painting with Liquitex heavy body acrylics since I've started as a professional artist. And I've stuck with those because they work really well. I've tried a whole bunch of different brands, and for whatever reason, I just really love that brand. The thing that has improved is the physical materials that I paint on. So it used to be like, you go and get like the studio caliber canvases. But now there's this company called Museo. And so it's actually fine Belgian linen stretched over aluminum canvas bars. So they don't warp, they're super light, and they're like gorgeous. So, as I moved along, but again, 2 of these canvases will run you $450 or something like that. You're not going to do that if you're selling a painting for $200, but when you're selling a painting for 16, 17 grand, then okay, it kind of makes more sense. I have experimented with oils, but when I was in college, I found out I was allergic to a lot of the different mediums that you use oil paint, as well as photochemicals. Back in the day when we used to use like photo developing stuff, and that's how old I am. And so I, that was also part of necessity. I also like that acrylic dries quickly. As for drawing, I used to religiously keep sketchbooks. So I probably have 100 sketchbooks from the age of 13 to 25, 26. But once I started painting full time, it's like all my effort goes into the canvas. So like when I travel, if I'm international, like when we were on a honeymoon and we were in like China and Thailand, I did carry around, I do little watercolors and stuff. But drawing is the foundation of everything. And if you want to really be a good artist, and if you want to be a great artist, you do have to do the foundation work. And the stuff that we did in college was absurd. Like first day of school, they were like, all right, draw this still life. And, I put a charcoal wash, I go in there with my eraser and start blocking out some shadows. And he has us critique them all. Hal Redcliffe was the professor, and he goes, okay, everyone, take out your pencil. This is your implement for the next year. And we're like, oh. And we would do stuff like he would put chairs on a table, like 10 of them, like an intertwine. And you just had to, measure it out and get everything. We would do a skeleton, front, side, back side, life size, draw them. So, we learned, color wheels, color palettes, studies of just mixing colors and oils, ad nausea. It was a very traditional program, but the key is if you want to effectually break the rules, you must know the rules. And so there's no limit to the amount of fundamentals that you can acquire as a skill set that will hurt you. So I would say, everything. And even if take a printmaking class, go into sculpture, try crazy techniques of everything. Like when we were in high school, we used to put implements on a giant stick and stand on a table and draw on the floor, or draw with our toes, or put a blindfold on and draw. You got to do all these things because the happy accident paradigm is very real. And I invented my collage style after I broke my leg, and I was sitting on the couch, zonked out of my mind on painkillers and reading the New York Post. The next thing you know, I have a collage painting style that I'm developing 13 years later to this day.
That's awesome. I think that our program definitely does a good job of incorporating, all that stuff. As a studio art major myself, I've taken sculpture and printmaking and photography. So I definitely think that that's very important, and UT does a good job of kind of getting that into the program.
Completely agree.
Another question was someone said, I'd like to start selling original paintings and prints through a website. Do you have any tips, recommendations, or things to keep in mind when creating and managing a website?
Sure. So, I would say that probably the path of least resistance would be to go and set up something through Squarespace, because you can integrate the e-commerce right into the website, which is very, very helpful. I built mine on WordPress, and, it's just, I have a lot of content. So I create a lot of content around each piece. And that was essentially modeled after working with electronic arts. Like, they have NHL 2022, the hockey game, but then they're like, well, how do we get people to go to easports.com and entice them to buy there? Well, it's about behind the scenes interviews with developers, original sketches, behind the scenes with the athletes and capturing their motion. And so I took that same approach for myself, and that's why I put my process online. And as I mentioned to you, I had someone steal a bunch of my stuff when I was in college, so I figured might as well put it out there because someone's going to steal it no matter what. And I write more cease and desist letters than you can imagine. But you have that, you have like Society 6, there's a ton of different options. The key is I would implore people, and this is just something that I prefer, but I would say try to stick as much as you can to originals. Because what'll happen is if you get into where it's like you create a piece and you're creating all these different options, you're becoming more of a retailer, and that's an entirely different business because you're still, and yes, if you're doing it through a site like Society 6 or whatever, they'll do it for you and they'll send it out. But I think that there's more value if you stick to the original work that you sell. Caveat, I have a friend, Michael Bierauer, and he's in Minnesota, and he's got a gallery in Seattle. And I interviewed him for Forbes, and he has a brilliant business model. He'll create a painting and, he'll sell it for what, 10 grand or something, but he'll make $125,000 on ancillary merchandise just from that one painting. And he has an entire team in place, and where you can buy, high fidelity, large scale canvas reproductions, then small canvas prints, and then embellished prints, and then prints and different varieties of prints and magnets. And, so he does it beautifully, and he does great work, and he does it really well. So if you have a team that wants to be that engine behind it, great. I just never wanted to be a guy where it's like I create a painting and then I'm like, okay, stuffing mailing tubes. And then, you get a call like, oh, this repro came out like crap, or I bought a pillow and it ripped. And, and then you're just dealing with a whole different thing. And if you're controlling just originals, you can control the way that your brand is perceived in a much more meaningful way. So, but, again, you do what you got to do to start, because, you're in college. It's not like your friends are like, well, I'm going to buy that original oil painting. It's like maybe post a print. So I get it.
You mentioned that you were self-represented. Tell us more about how you made this decision. And, for artists just starting out, what should they consider in making this decision?
Totally. So I'm self-represented because I was fortunate enough to have this bizarre set of experience before I went full-time. And which is why the advice I give to young people is that, you're probably not going to be able to be a full-time creative straight out of college. And these are just facts. They're realities, but, all the jobs that I had working, at the Trump organization and working in recruiting and advertising and learning about contracts and market developing and pricing, branding, negotiations, just interacting with different people. It was critical. And when I came out, I realized, hey, I can design a logo. I can put up my social media. I can build a website. I can write a contract. I can negotiate the price of my work without being emotionally destroyed by like someone being like, it's worth that, like you're gonna get that, So that was just all for me, and I don't think that you have to do it, but the traditional route is you go into a college, you get a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and then you go and get your Master's of Fine Arts, and through your master's program, you're going to have professors who are going to plug you into the local art scene. So I actually did look at Columbia University to go and get a Master of Fine Arts. And, and then you go to a bunch of art openings and you meet people and you go to open studios and you attend events at all the different museums. And eventually, you'll get into smaller galleries. And then if you're doing well, then a middle gallery will poach you, and then a large gallery will poach you, if everything is working well. And, people have built incredibly successful careers out of working with galleries. And, and there's many different ways to get to the top. For me, it was just, I understood the business aspect of it. I really like the business aspect of it. So I enjoy that I have full control of what I'm doing. It does limit me because I spend time when I could be painting, writing contracts and, creating web content and, having these calls with collectors. And, but I love it and it suits my personality. But if not, you can go through the galleries. You could find a good business friend of yours who just happens to be exceptional at selling your work, and they could become your representation. So, it's about your strengths and weaknesses. And, I just had that experience set. I wanted to do the business, but any way you can get there is sweet.
One of the next questions we had, thank you, was how did the pandemic affect your work and your painting style?
Well, yeah, great question. so like the loneliness of the long distance runner and being an artist has always been the same, so it's kind of like you saw those memes where it's like, here's an artist during a pandemic, here's an artist during the Black Plague, here's an artist during Mardi Gras. It's like they're just in the studio painting by themselves.
Yeah.
The big uncertainty for sure is, and I just touched on this before, but having been a full-time artist since 2009, I've seen a lot of cycles, and I've noticed that every time you get into an election year, it's typically a down year. People are protecting their finances and their funds because they want to see which way the administration is going and what they're going to do with their savings and their investments and their portfolios. This was a double whammy. I mean, we had a pandemic and an election year. I was like, could we do the pandemic and not the election year at the same time? But ironically enough, not much change in the day-to-day. I did get COVID in January of last year. So that was a bummer. I skipped all my beer league hockey to not get COVID, and then I got COVID. So I spent 2 weeks sitting in my studio watching TV. So the only difference was I got a little less fit. But so that wasn't a big deal. But I actually think the pandemic has been a tremendous time for creatives because like the real estate market, you just didn't see it coming. Like I saw realtors 2 months into the pandemic and they're like, this is the first time I've had 2 months off my whole career. Next thing you know, they're making money hand over fist. It's insane. And then of course, when everybody's buying all these new homes, they're going to need artwork for the walls, which is fantastic. So it's been kind of a boom time. And then, with that, the parallel of the popular emergence of the NFT space, it's all of a sudden, it's like a very good time to be a creative, which is, and historically speaking, that's not something you often say, particularly when you're dealing with a pandemic. But I think it's kind of been a blessing in a way, as much hardship as it's brought people. It's not great for the creative class for buying homes, but it certainly is great for finding new walls and getting your work out there.
I think also something that the pandemic did was introduce and kind of excel social media. Have you had to kind of pick up on that and learn those tools and how to kind of, market yourself through those platforms?
It's funny. I did flirt with streaming from the studio over the years, but when the pandemic hit, I went hardcore and I was basically streaming every day. And, this is me literally dressed up, right? I'm normally completely disheveled and I'm wearing like a robe and, pajama pants and, my underwear is hanging out the back of my shirt and whatever. But I started just streaming every day and it was cool because all of a sudden you had these people and they're bored out of their minds. And all of a sudden watching paint dry in real time became great entertainment. So, and it was funny. Basically what I found too is that, so for my collector class, I call a lot of them digital ghosts. So these are people who are with portfolios, 10, 100 million plus dollars. They're on social media, they're private accounts. They follow 46 people. They have 872 followers and they have one post, and it's but they're watching you, and that's the thing you got to remember is that people just think only the people that are interacting with you on social media are watching you. That is completely wrong. The people more often than not that have, bought my paintings or commissioned a piece, they're like, oh yeah, I saw you're working on this and I saw you're working on this. And I'm like, damn, you never interact. I had no idea, but they're there and they're ghosts.
That's awesome. How do you think that a college artist gets access to potential collectors? Even if our first few pieces are only a few $100s, if even.
And that's the thing. I can't imagine, I look back and you see and I keep going back to him, but I just think in terms of art business, he was a paradigm shatterer, right? Warhol, imagine what he would have done with the internet. It's possible he could have pulled a Howard Stern and missed the internet, which Howard Stern missed the internet somehow. But, you imagine what he would do. But I look back and I'm like, shoot, what would have I done if I could have had an Instagram, and now you have Snapchat and TikTok and all these different things. And, I think your ability to access the world and develop a collector base, being young, tech savvy, brand forward, is huge. And I think that you can accelerate your career rapidly. The one thing that I am noticing, at the advent of these social platforms is I call it the bandana over the face effect. It's everybody wants to be a baller artist and have a bandana over their face and, be in some sort of $500,000 whip in Miami and be like, what's up? And, have a show and celebrities come. But then it's really, if you don't love the work, it's a miserable industry. Like you have to love the work because man, it's a long way to go because you spend a lot of time by yourself. Like I'm in a local play. I play beer league hockey, and it's because that's the only social life I have. I'm building Legos with my kids. I chat with my wife after the kids go down, but other than that, I'm by myself all day. It's not an easy career, but with social media though, to get out there and develop this, it's very easy. The key is consistency. And I always tell people, always think of the elevator test, which is imagine that you have a new series of paintings. And so you sold the first one for $10,000. Now, fast forward 3 months, you have those paintings in your studio, you haven't made any sales, your roommate's wondering where the rent is, you're stressing out, you got credit card debt, and some other collector comes in and be like, I like those paintings, I'll take 3 of those for 10,000 total. And you're like, well, shoot, I got to make the bills, right? So you sell the paintings. But then imagine that at Art Basel, 3 months later, those 2 collectors are in the same elevator. They get to talking about who they collect. Your name comes up and they say, do you mind if I ask what you bought and how much you paid? And he's like, oh, no problem. I bought this painting in the series for 10 grand. He's like, well, I bought 3 of those paintings for 10 total. So what you've done in that one moment is you've obliterated your market. You've destroyed the trust of 2 collectors, one who overpaid, one who vastly underpaid, and makes it feel like your market is completely fraudulent. So that's the tricky part. I think when you're on social media and exposure now, it's so easy for everyone to communicate that you just have to assume that anyone could send a message to anyone and be like, hey, what's up with this? So, consistency is the key.
Thank you. One of the last questions that I think we have in the chat is, you were talking about your website and, having that experience and being able to kind of know that you can create a contract and you can create a website on your own because of this prior experience. But what do you think about selling through a third-party site versus finding somewhere to print your own and ship them out yourself? You do a lot. I mean, you do pretty much everything yourself. And I think as artists, we aren't getting that full kind of degree on a business standpoint and missing out on a lot of like that financial education and being able to run a business. So, how do you compare getting the help of like this third-party site versus kind of doing it yourself?
Well, I think with anything, you want to be a student of the game and you want to do your homework. So you want to find out, what kind of exposure they get, what kind of traffic they get, what kind of services they offer, and what percentages they take. So, you might look at someone like a Saatchi Art, and, Charles Saatchi from the Saatchi and Saatchi advertising legacy, a major collector of art, built this massive platform. It's very, very successful, gets a ton of traffic, and people sell a lot of work through there. So, looking into that is very important. I think you just got to research. You got to see what you're up for. If you're like, I don't want to write contracts, I don't want to worry about, getting my work carefully wrapped in acid-free paper and bubble wrap and then get crated, insured, and shipped. Just try shipping a painting to Canada. It's absurd how much documentation you have to fill out. So, just research the platform and figure out what you're willing to do, but realize that the more you're willing to take on, the more you're going to retain of your own profits. So for me, if I'm selling a painting directly to a collector for $34,000, that's the equivalent of selling a painting for $68,000 through a gallery, if not more, because galleries are going to take 50% right off the top. So the more that you're willing to put in the work and figure out these different nuances of the art business, the better. And in a contract, it doesn't have to be big. It should be a one-page contract. You want to, retain intellectual property. You want to retain reproduction rights, and you want to retain the right to exhibit the works. And at this point, I tell the latter, I'm like, hey, I'm not going to pull this $24,000 painting off your wall so I can hang it at a Starbucks. It's like, if I call you and it's going to be exhibited, it's going to go in a show that is significantly going to raise the profile and the value of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important. But overall, the more seriously you treat your market and your work and yourself as a creative person, the more seriously people will respect you. And, I'm at a point now where I have people who are waiting for my work to get above 100,000 to buy a piece because they're just like, I'm sorry, it's just not worth it. And it's like, you just think it's always the opposite way, but it does go up that way as well. It's like, you're going to go through periods of time where you increase your prices and you're going to alienate part of your markets, and you're going to go through growing pains, but then you keep going up. And that's the key. But, everybody's got to do what's best for them. And when you're just getting out there and you're just getting exposure, find a good third-party site, make sure and read reviews too. It's the same thing as anything you buy. Like, make sure you see reviews if they're treating their partners terribly and they're like, oh, we offer white glove service. And it's some guy coming over with a cardboard box and slamming your oil painting in there. I mean, you want to make sure you're aware of that.
Thank you so much, Borbay, for joining us today.
Thank you,
We had one last question, I think, from Isabel. I don't know, Isabel, did you want to ask a quick question before we wrap?
Yeah, sure. I'll make it quick. So thank you so much, Borbay, for being here. This is so wonderful. I work in career services at the College of Fine Arts, and it's just so enjoyable to hear working artists talk about their practice and all of the nuances that come with that. And I am working with a lot of art students in particular, and I just wanted to ask you a two-tiered question about some of the anxieties that I see art students face. So a lot of the students that I meet with have a lot of worries about financial stability after they graduate, whether that's from family pressure or from income issues. And they have a lot of fears, and justifiably so. So I was wondering, I have a lot of thoughts about this, but I was wondering if you could talk about any words of wisdom for college students who are worried about the instability of a freelance-based career. And to build on that, you touched on the importance of mentorship earlier in the talk, which I think is so important and key for college students. So if you could just touch on the basis of how to start that network as a college student and how to build those mentorships.
Absolutely. Great question. I'll try to whack in there. And if I miss something, come back to it because it's a really good question. So one of the things I did lament about when I left college was, like I said, I went to college and they were getting sign-in bonuses to be a graphic designer, 40, 50 grand. Like, it was absurd. And the dot-com burst, nothing. So what did I have to do? I had to freelance, and I didn't know anything about contracts, negotiating. And one of the biggest, most important thing to understand if you're freelancing is retaining salary. So the tax man cometh, and he cometh hard. And so if you don't have money set aside, you're going to be in a big world of hurt. Okay. And now I'm not saying people getting out of college should be focused on like, okay, I need quarterly taxes. But first thing you want to do is, if you're going to freelance in the creative field, is find someone that, who's a family friend, who's in the accounting space, and get some basic insight just to understand that, okay, if you worked at, I worked as a freelancer for A&E television, and I was paid hourly, and, all of a sudden I got this like, big check, and I'm like, whoa, yeah. And, I talked to my accountant buddy. He's like, you're going to want to go ahead and put at least 40% of that away and just forget that it exists, because you're going to be taxed at the end of the year on this. And, and I was like, whoa, that seems crazy. And then the first time I had a job and I had a salary, I'm like, why did you take so much out? And I was like, oh, taxes. So I think it's really important to just understand the fundamental basics of freelancing. As for work, what people also have to realize is that if you're an artist, you're an artist. Okay. When I was working, in real estate development and recruiting and advertising and stand-up comedy, I was an artist. First and foremost. Saul LeWitt, one of the most famous contemporary artists there ever was, he was mopping floors at 41. So there is no set path. If you don't come out, and it's like people think if they're not written up in the New York Times 2 years outside of leaving college, they're washed up and done. And that's just not the case. I mean, I didn't paint professionally until I was 28. So what they do is, like, I always encourage people to embrace the 2-year rule. So go out in the world, get a regular job, still call yourself an artist, learn everything you can, but never stay for more than 2 years. Because after 2 years, if you're at a company for 2 years, that means two things. One, you're good enough at the job, and two, they like you, which means they're going to bust out the old golden handcuffs. So you start living above your means, and you're in a more expensive apartment, and you're, instead of going for burgers, you're getting steak, and, instead of going for the, $1.50 well nights, you're going for $15 cocktails, and you become accustomed to a lifestyle. So you got to be very, very careful. So those are big trappings. But they have to realize that, when I was working in these different jobs, like, I learned so much about contracts. I learned so much about money and finance and recruiting and all these different things that I couldn't do what I do now without it. So they got to embrace the fact that you're not a failure if you go out of college and get a job somewhere else, but don't stay too long. When they're in the freelancing space, again, contracts, retaining money for the tax man, very, very important. And I think that the most important thing is that, as an artist, you think, I'm an artist because I don't want to deal with this stuff. I don't want to deal with taxes. I don't want to deal with money. I just want to be famous and live in a loft and, which would be great, but it's not going to happen for all but very few people. So instead of being afraid of these things, I would encourage these students to embrace it and be like, you know what, I want to learn about how to run a small business. I want to embrace this information, because if you do, the freedom is great. If you go through galleries, they're going to have 50%. If you go to a company and they say it's a 40-hour job, it's a 70-hour job. And literally you could get fired because almost everything is at will employment. And, so, what used to be security, like my parents' generation, it was like, get a job, stay in the job till you retire, get great benefits, buy a big RV and drive to Yellowstone Park, right? But now it's like, you go and you get a job and it's like, boom, company's acquired. All right, you're out, and you're here and you're there, and it's startup culture and everyone's an entrepreneur. So I think they just need to embrace that.
That is awesome. Awesome advice.
Thank you.
Let me just then, I guess, Tabby, I'll close for us tonight. Unless anybody else has a question. Is there anybody else that had a question? I'll have to say, Borbay, that was amazing. And you are one of a select few single name only artists. I think that truly you have a global following of collectors. You have that reputation on a global basis. So I just want you to know that here in the sweetheart of Texas, you're now in our tribe. And please come visit us at any time. We're going to be just so excited to share what you've taught us tonight, put it up on our YouTube channel, start to really have more of those conversations and help people not be afraid of the business aspects of art, to realize the power that's there. We're really proud of all the success that you have had and that you're continuing to have. And Tabby, thank you so much. You did a great job at interviewing and having this conversation. I just really had a good time. I know everybody did. So unless there's something else, absolutely. Unless there's something else, thank you for coming to the Center for Creative Entrepreneurship for this fireside chat, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, Borbay.
Thank you for having me.